Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Rosquetta. I'm the founding executive director of the Center for High Impact Philanthropy here at Penn School of Social Policy and Practice. And along with Jen Gleason and the folks at SVP Philadelphia, I am thrilled that our organizations are co-hosting this evening's conversation. Between two aerodynamically headed men who I have long followed, who I've been the beneficiary of their great work, and just inspiring change makers and leaders. And I have the pleasure of being able to introduce them both. And then the way this conversation is going to work. I'll introduce them. They will start talking. And then we will be sure, though, to leave plenty of time for a Q&A right around 6:40. And we wanted to keep this as a meeting, a Zoom meeting, as opposed to a webinar, so you can all see each other. The chat function is on, as I see many of you have already discovered. So feel free to make comments in the chat, but I would say if there's any question that you want to make sure Paul and Michael address, kind of hold that until around 6:40, just to give Jen, because Jen and I are sort of bookending the event. Jen's going to moderate the Q&A. And that'll help Jen be able to organize questions and also see some of the themes that come up, your reactions to what Paul and Michael start out with. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Paul Shoemaker and Michael Nutter. Paul Shoemaker is a legend. I think those of us who have had the pleasure of working with him and knowing him now for decades appreciate his informal title as executive connector, because he is the supreme connector of people and ideas, and as the founding head and international leader of SVP International. He's really been at the forefront of identifying and developing models for change. And he is an author, a podcaster, and you'll see in this discussion that follows, a lot of the themes that we're going to talk about today are coming from his most recent book, Taking Charge of Change. The other thing that I now newly appreciate is for 10 years, he was a high school basketball ref. And so I now understand his ability to manage sometimes challenging people as the parent now of three teenagers. So I get it now, Paul. And for those of us who are based in Philadelphia, I'm about to introduce somebody who, frankly, really needs no introduction, and that is Michael Nutter, the former two-term mayor of Philadelphia, before which he spent nearly 15 years in Philadelphia City Council. Since then, he has been engaged in all sorts of initiatives to improve public policy, government, and civic life. He's the inaugural David Dinkins Professor of Professional Practice in Urban Affairs and Public Affairs at Columbia. He holds fellowships in a host of universities, including here at his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, and is serving on many advisory boards, all focused on how we can create a better world. The one thing that I think some of you have long known is he is also, I believe, the only mayor to perform live with the Sugar Hill Gang. So that just gives you a little sense of who's about to talk. And I have to say, like a lot of you over the past 18 months, major Zoom fatigue, but I was the beneficiary of fly on the wall between the tremendous amount of smack that was flying between these two in the run up to this evening. So I am going to pass it on to these two and let the sparks fly. So Paul, Michael, floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. Man, thank you everybody jumping online here. This is the 20th city I've done this in. No BS. I was so looking forward to Philly and so looking forward to hanging out with Mayor Nutter for an hour. So thank you, Mayor Nutter, for hanging out with us for an hour. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Yeah. I was on the other 20, just for the audience. He said the same thing in every one of the other cities. I just want you to know. So,
oh man, I'm already behind this. I'm already behind the 8 ball.
Right.
So just to give folks a quick to reinforce what Cal just said, I'm going to do 15 minutes on the book. Michael and I are going to have a conversation after that for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A for you guys. So hang on to your questions. When he and I get towards the end of our conversation, you start to see Jen come in. Don't hesitate to start throwing questions in the chat at us. Okay. And I don't normally do this if I'm in person, but one of the things I found is since I'm not in person, I can't sort of like give visual cues about where I am in the talk. So here's 4 road signs for the next 15 minutes. I'm going to start with why I wrote this book, just a few minutes. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how I did the research on it. After that, I'm going to spend the bulk of my time on who these leaders are, stories about 2 of them, as well as this framework of traits. And I will finish up with where the idea of rebuilders comes from. So that's your roadmap for the next 15 minutes. I have a deep, visceral belief about what the most important leadership challenge is for the decade ahead. And that belief was formed over the last 2 or 3 years. But for me, in a very sincere, genuine way, it started decades ago, actually in small town Iowa. So I grew up in a city called Fort Dodge. For those of you that don't know where that is, it's right between Humboldt and Webster City. My dad was a Methodist minister. There were 2 Methodist churches in town. My dad parted with the African-American church and pastor religiously. Pun intended, also true. I remember going to their church. It was in a part of Fort Dodge called the Southeast Bottoms. Why would you call a part of any town that name? When we would drive there, we'd go by that community school, and I would compare their school to my school. And when that pastor would come over to my dad's church, I can just remember some people looked at him differently. So I can still vividly see the church, the pastor, and the looks on those people's faces. So my young mind didn't yet know that what to call economic, educational, and racial inequity. But facing and reversing those inequities for me is the leadership challenge of the 2020s. And I hope there's a bunch of people on this call that sort of believe in that sort of same idea. All right, so 50 years later, in 2018, I'm working on a project consulting about poverty in America. We had to look at sort of all forms of inequity affecting poverty. My work over the last 20 plus years has been a lot of individual focused projects, sort of like one inequity at a time. And it's a little bit like looking at those individual frames in a photo mosaic. You don't really see it until you step back and look at the whole, what you really got. So that project gave me the chance to step back and look at the whole mosaic of inequities in America. When I did, I won't say I was surprised by the scale and the scope, but I will say I did not grasp the pace and the downward path of inequity in America over the last 25 years. So let me just give you 3 quick data points. Number 1, economically, we all know about the wealth divide. We've now reached a point where the top 1%, 3 million people in America, have as much wealth as 300 million other Americans. Socially, the education achievement gap, we were making statistical progress for about 25, 30 years. Soon after the 2000s, we sort of like leveled off and we started to creep back up a little bit. And of course, in 2020, we know that education gap has widened a lot again for millions of kids. And health-wise, we have expanded the access to quantity of health, but the access to the quality of health has widened and continues to widen significantly. You can live in Seattle, Washington, 6 miles apart in those 2 zip codes, and your life expectancy is 20 years apart. I could go on and on. I knew each of these inequities. I hadn't taken the time to step back and look at all of these inequities. For the 50 years after World War II, America was making very choppy, uneven, but sort of slowly climbing, making progress up that long, steep hill of economic, social, health equity. About 25 years ago, man, we took the wrong path and we started heading back down that mountain. So that 25-year downward trajectory for me makes urgently clear that reversing and addressing inequity is the most significant challenge for leaders in the decade ahead. So here's the question for America and for each of us. What are the vital leadership traits we uniquely need for the most inequitable America in decades? So my next step was, how do I start to answer that question? So that's what I spent part of 2019 on. I'm not a researcher, I'm not an economist, I'm not an analyst. I'm a 30-year cross-sector networker. So I spent parts of 6 months thinking about 3 qualitative questions. Number one, leaders. I talked to nearly 100 of the best leaders I'd worked with over that course of that time. That started to generate a list of attributes in a lot of spreadsheets. The second thing for me was impact. I also wanted to make sure I was talking to people that were creating impact, was starting to reverse the inequities of the last 25 years. That was a lot of Venn diagrams. And the third thing was to think about the context of leaders today. The context is complexity. We have the most divided silo we've had in America for who knows how long. We have a technology and media that love to make it even hard to know what the facts are we're going to argue about. The 3 sectors, public, private, nonprofit, they're blurring together. That's an opportunity. It's also complexity. We have this range of challenges in America: cybersecurity, geopolitical, climate, rural divide, go on, that are generational, and they're at inflection points. So just to repeat, I was trying to hack the question: what are the vital leadership traits we are going to uniquely need for the decade ahead in the most inequitable, complex America we've faced in, I would say, nearly 100 years? Okay, let me talk about who some of those leaders are. So let me start with one exemplar and one vital trait that really stuck out to me. B. Vong went to Kenyon College in Ohio, which is 444 miles directly west of Philly. She pursued her dream of education despite and sort of in defiance of her parents' cultural tradition about girls that they brought over from Vietnam. So for B, education and the data about it are a very personal choice. She's an exemplar of a vital trait that I call data conviction. That can sound a little dry, but it is not. So these leaders know that data is an indispensable part of the equation. They know it's strategic, not tactical. They know how to use data wisely. Even more importantly, they know how to not use data unwisely. And in the world of misinformation, leaders that are passionate about this trait and determined to stick with it are going to be absolutely vital. Today, B is the managing director of the education practice at Project Evident. She expanded my notion of what data is and does. She also has a Philly connection, so that's why I brought her on tonight. In 2013 and 14, as many of you know, Dr. Haidt led a restructuring of the Philly School District. B was the deputy CFO during much of that time. She said it was an imperfect process, but they had a few guiding principles when it came to data. Number one, they put every single data point online. Number two, they put the data in real terms for people's lives, not just academic data, but student level, family level, facilities, geography. And the third thing she said was they hoped data would let the community know how comprehensive and how thorough they had tried to be. Data gives hard, subjective, wicked challenges a chance for people to find alignment. Or as B would say to me, a chance for data to be a flashlight, not a hammer. So we can accept the world as it is, or we can find and build up more leaders with a data conviction like B. Vong. Okay, I'm going to share 3 slides with you guys real briefly, just to sort of ground the conversation and make sure we have a common visual they're sort of working from. So this one this should recognize or be similar from what I talked about just a minute ago. This is how I approach the problem. I look for great leaders, true social impact, and especially that bottom circle, complexities of the decade, which just seems to grow and get more complex, by the month around here. So I was looking for the intersection, that little scribble in the middle. Those are the 5 traits that jumped out of that analysis. And these to me are the 5 vital leadership traits to face these complexities and reverse the inequities in the decade ahead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define and discuss 2 of these tonight. And the other 3, we can talk about some other time, buy the book, talk to me. But here's what they are. And I'll just list them briefly. Generosity mindset, 24/7 authenticity, data conviction, which we just talked about, the capacity for complexity, and cross-sector fluency, which we're also going to talk about in just a minute. So these are the two individuals we're particularly spotlighting tonight. I just talked about B in the upper right corner. She's the exemplar of data conviction. And lower left there, you all know that guy. And we'll have a conversation here in just about 5 minutes. Just to be clear, I am not talking about leadership for culture or teams or trust or strategy or other good stuff. I'm talking specifically about the leaders and traits that we need to face the complexities and reverse the inequities that are facing America in the decade ahead in a way that we haven't faced in nearly 100 years. One of the other rebuilders, which I call those leaders in the book, his name's Dan Cardinelli. And in my conversation with Dan, he's a big jazz fan. So he said to him, we were having a side conversation. He said, jazz pianists, the best ones are technically proficient and creatively agile. So metaphorically, we have a lot of existing leaders today that are technically proficient, but not creatively agile for the complexity of tomorrow. They are still playing the same old tunes in much the same way. We need leaders that are tuned for the times. So another one of those complexities I mentioned just a minute ago are how all three sectors are blurring together. The trait that is best tuned to meet the moment is cross-sector fluency. So I first met Mayor Nutter on March 11, 2020, over a Zoom call for a meeting we almost had in New York City. I assume that date and place will stand out. So what stood out for me over time is not just his impressive career, but as Kat just referenced, also his musical playlist. And the fact that he performed with Sugar Hill Gang, whose song Rapper's Delight dominated my senior year of high school, I'm all the more in sync with him now. So this is truly a leader that is tuned for the times. Cross-sector fluency, let me define it just a little bit. There's a dictionary definition, gracefulness and ease of movement. Our challenges today do not exist in silos. They cut across sectors. A generation ago, folks could sort of hang out in their three sectors and be okay. The cross-sector fluent rebuilder is often the glue person. They have a more holistic view. They see more holistic solutions. A generation ago, these kinds of leaders were nice to have. They're now a must-have. So Mayor Nutter was an investment banker. He has been involved with nonprofits addressing education, public safety, sustainability, lots of things. And of course, he's been the mayor. That is as cross-sector as you can get. He needed all of those when he came into office with a $450 million deficit, which by the time he actually entered office was almost $1 billion greater. One of the things he told me was that public-private partnerships were a key part of how they made progress on that. And cross-sector fluent leaders are critical for public-private partnerships. Just one more quick sidebar about the mayor. When he and I were talking, he told me about a race that he ran before the mayor's race for city council, and that one he didn't win. And at the end of that race, he returned the loaner car to his friend with the stolen radio no longer in it and $1,000 in parking tickets. Quote, there was nothing, I mean nothing about me that said this guy is going to be mayor someday. Just a reminder, we all have agency over the path we take and the leader we become. We can all accept the world as it is, or we can find and build up more leaders with cross-sector fluency like Michael Nutter. One last thought. So back to Fort Dodge and the question of where does this notion of rebuilders come from? So this is this bridge in Fort Dodge, Iowa in Snell Crawford Park. Again, where I grew up. That's my dad and my brother walking down the creek bed. I would sit underneath that simple arch bridge for hours in the summer, listening to the cars go rumbling over. My C in physics, my freshman year of college said, you're not gonna be an engineer, Shoemaker, but I was still fascinated by bridges. So every bridge has three parts, a foundation, a substructure, and a superstructure. Bridges in America are only as strong as their underlying foundations. 2/3 of our bridges were built between 1950 and 2000, when we were making sort of slow, steady economic progress on equity. In the last 25 years, our bridges are in a state of disrepair. 40% need to be repaired, 8% need to be urgently rebuilt. The state of bridges in America is very evocative of the state of our civil society. This is why I call these leaders rebuilders. We have a fundamentally different America than we did even 25 years ago. We need rebuilders for our bridges, and we need them for our communities and our companies across the US. Last thought, at the end of the day, this hour, this book, it's not even about Michael and me. It's about all of us that are ready to define the leader we need to be for the decade ahead. I wrote about 38 rebuilders in the book because I wanted everybody to see themselves in some of those folks. And I truly hoped that their stories would be a call to action to everyone. So thank you guys for listening for 16 minutes. And Mayor, thank you so much for being here. I want to bring you in now and have a conversation.
Thank you.
About 15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
Let's start with, I'm sure everybody wants to know, what the heck are you up to these days?
Well, Paul, thank you. Kat and Jen, thank you very much for having me. Because I'm a recovering elected official, there's a way that I need to start this, which is to thank and recognize at least 3 people who I see immediately, who have a lot to do with who I either became or continue to be. The first person I see is Jennifer Rodriguez. We served together in the administration. Wendy Epstein, who helped me along my path, also helped me raise a ton of money for different elections, and someone I've just admired for most of my adult life, and one of the best judges the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has ever seen or experienced, and that's Judge Flora Wolf. It's so good to see you, Judge. You asked me what I'm doing these days.
What are you up to?
Mostly just doing Zoom calls with authors of various books. Apparently,
how's that going for you?
Really not that well, and ultimately, I think it's just become a waste of time. But I usually feel sorry for them, and I'm all about just trying to help people promote their stuff. The other time, as Kat mentioned, the fellowship at Penn is some really, quite frankly, a continuation of, for me, what I consider some unfinished business from my time as mayor. The soul-crushing level of poverty here in the city of Philadelphia, and my wife and I are working on a project together, which we'll be talking about more publicly later. But it's focused on income inequality, poverty, social mobility, those kinds of issues that we started working on when I was in office, but you do only get 8 years. And these are long-term intergenerational issues and challenges. I teach at, as Kat mentioned, Columbia University, at the School of International and Public Affairs, and another fellowship at the University of Chicago Harris School. I've been a fellow at Harvard, Kennedy School, Institute of Politics, and was recently appointed to the Senior Advisory Committee at Harvard Kennedy Institute of Politics. And then a lot of private sector work, advising a variety of clients who trying to figure out how governments work all across the country. And then a bunch of public policy areas, things that I really passionately care about, and now try to help mayors and public policy leaders across the country focus on these issues. I love the topic and your work, Paul. I just want to mention on that diagram, they have their variety of computer programs that can really actually like draw a circle in that that Venn diagram.
I did that intentionally.
That little squiggle thing. I just want to mention. I mean, there are a lot of programs out there that can help you with that, and go on Zoom calls with friends like you.
Awesome. So if you're trying to be retired mayor, you're clearly not doing a very good job of being retired.
Yeah, no, I really kind of failed at that.
So obviously from the book, and this is from people like you and other folks, this cross-sector thing, I don't mean that just as sort of like, a catchphrase. I think it's enormously important to the kinds of challenges we're taking on. So how did you were a genuinely cross-sector person. How did that help you in your role? And how important do you think it is to sort of city solving problems going forward?
Yeah. I love the way you frame things out. And one of the things that jumped out at me was, a lot of times, folks, you're running for office, you got all these ideas. It's great to be the ideas person. And, people like to talk about IQ. I like to talk about EQ. To a greater extent, this job, this particular job, talking about mayor, but a lot of leadership jobs. I describe them as kind of a roller coaster of emotion. There were so many times when I was, I could have been reading, stories of second graders at 8:45, 9 o'clock in the morning, and later that day, deliver remarks, at a funeral, or something else, insane happened in the course of the day. And so just a significant amount of emotion, and you have to be willing to absorb a lot, keep yours in check, and be there for other people. I mean, that's really what helped me a great deal. So, working in the nightclub when I was in college, working at Xerox, being in city council all those years, doing other things, chairing the Pennsylvania Convention Center, and just, getting involved in the National League of Cities when I was in city council. Trying to educate myself about leadership. I did not know early on that I was going to run for mayor. Decided that later. But all of those lessons and tons of mentorship and support from a very, very early age. When I got involved in politics in the early 80s, the late Councilman John Anderson was my mentor, and unfortunately died, not that long after we met, but a lot of lessons learned and a lot of friendships developed over those years. So I've had a lot of support and continue to have, mentors and advisors, and it's really been a key to my success, any success that I've had. And the guy whose car that I returned, that was Dick Hayden, former state representative and now a big-time lawyer. We are still friends. He was chair of my mayoral committee.
Did you ever replace his radio?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Life is really kind of funny. So that same year, my sister was on Wheel of Fortune. And she won some stuff. I mean, she didn't go all the way, but I mean, she won some things. One of the things she won, this is for the younger people on the call here, there was a time when radios were not built into the infrastructure of the car. They actually were removable, and people stole them. One of the things she won on Wheel of Fortune was a car radio, which she then gave me, and I gave to Dick Hayden.
That's great,
man. Has a way of working out,
It's good. Next time I tell that story, I know how to finish the full cycle of the story. So just a general question. I promise you, I'm not looking for, like you said, sort of like advertising the book. In the stuff I talked about and the stuff you read about, what, in the way that I talk about leadership, what resonates for you, or what do you agree with, disagree? Just a couple observations.
Yeah, mostly agree. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, I do know many of the people that you wrote about.
Yep.
Some I didn't know, but I do believe that there are some common traits. And I think the beauty of the book is it really synthesizes and drills down on, what some of those are. And, first, starting with myself, none of us are perfect, and no one is going to be like someone else, but there are some commonalities, I think, in many of these traits. And, as we go forward, again, as you framed it, I mean, I got elected, what was that, 14 years ago? So much has changed. So much has changed. So much has changed just in the last 5 years. I mean, I left in January of 16. My last full year was 2015. I mean, it's a different environment. It's a different world. I'm talking to mayors all the time. There's a whole new group. There's the pre-recession mayors. Most of us are gone. Now there's the new crew, right? They're dealing with a pandemic and a recession and civil unrest. And, if you were in a couple of years ago, you had the craziest election, since whenever, right? So, I mean, we thought that 08, 9, 10 were bad.
Yeah.
This is really, really different. And it does take a different kind of leader. Now, fortunately, many of them are younger, grew up a lot more with social media, Twitter and Facebook were 2 years old when I came into office.
Yep.
And we had to try to catch up with it. And then, I mean, I think we were at least, side by side.
Yeah.
They know this stuff, right? So they're in that. They use data. And they're talking about KPIs and that kind of language. If somebody said that to me, 15 years ago, I'd say, "Oh, you mean KFC?" Right. So right. It's a different kind of environment.
Yep.
And these leaders, I think, are built for this time. And many of them reach out to, those who have served before. And so we maintain a pretty good rapport with a lot of the newer, younger mayors, and many of them do reach out for advice.
Very cool. So as you talk to folks around the country, are there any sort of civic leaders or particular people that really stand out for you as high potential, or we should be keeping an eye on, or they give you hope?
Well, there are a couple of them, but they also happen to be leaving.
Okay.
Steve Benjamin, just a tremendous good friend, Mayor of Columbia. He's not running again. We know, I guess it was a week or two ago, Mayor Bottoms in Atlanta decided not to seek re-election. But, you look at some of the work that Mayor London Breed is doing in San Francisco, Mayor Sylvester Turner in Houston, LaToya Cantrell in New Orleans. These are many of the leaders of the future. Some really new people. Mayor Kim Janey just came into office, first African-American, first woman mayor in Boston, literally just a couple weeks ago. Mayor Jones in St. Louis. And so, Mayor Lightfoot, of course, in Chicago. So, but many of the issues and challenges that they face, like I said, this is a different time.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of the same stuff. It's public safety, it's education, it's the operations of government. What we didn't have to deal with 12 years ago in that recession was, sickness and death, and the massive impact that COVID-19 has had on the business community, the business environment. Tax revenues, people went out of business, unfortunately, in the Great Recession of 8, 9, 10, because of a worldwide economic crisis. In this one, governments, with no criticism, because it was the right thing to do, governments told people to close and go home. And we literally put people out of business for public health reasons. So right reason and an even greater challenge. And so how do you come back from that? Again, I was spoiled during my tenure. 7 of my 8 years were with President Obama in the Obama administration. I won't comment on the most recent occupants of the White House, but, under these circumstances, it is really good to have, President Biden, Vice President Harris, who, again, understand and know cities, are putting dollars where people need them, and I'll kind of close this part with this,
Good.
When you talk about the politics, all these Republicans, and I'm not trying to make a political statement, these are just facts, right? So none of the Republicans voted for the American Rescue Plan. In the meantime, I doubt that any of their constituents in those Republican states are sending back the $1,400 check. They're going to take the extra money on the insurance. They're going to file for new PPP loans and everything else that comes with it. I mean, it's the level of hypocrisy in all of this that is most disturbing to some extent. But, I think even some of that is starting to tamp down and people are starting to understand, what the future is all about.
So sort of the core message of my book is, how do we face the complexities and start to reverse these inequities in the decade ahead?
Yeah.
Does leadership on equity, does it look any different to you today than it did 10, 15 years ago?
Oh, definitely. First of all, when in the aftermath of the murder, certainly of George Floyd, and it should not have taken that long. I mean, there's a whole laundry list. I mean, we had Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner. I mean, a slew of folks when I was in office, right? And there were protests, but I think the George Floyd murder just really took people over the edge. So last summer, everybody's, a lot of people, corporations and everyone else, Black Lives Matter, this, that, and the other. Okay, good. Can we sustain that conversation? That's really the question. What's the level of commitment? Is there longevity? But I do believe that we are in an environment where we can at least more seriously have these conversations, and that Black, white, Latino, Asian, and anybody else, you can be in a conversation and folks are not as flipped out, maybe as they had been in the past. I think a lot of people know, a lot of white people know that something has to change. Things have not been right. And, you know, unfortunately for some, I think it did take watching a man die 9 minutes and 29 seconds in broad daylight on video, no question about it, that some people finally said, you know, that's effed up. That's not right. And what are we going to do about it? And I think that's really kind of where we are. And that's where the leadership is really going to come to bear.
Yep. I always agree with you. I did, just as a sidebar in response to that, I did a project in the fourth quarter of the year with Policy Link, talking to CEOs about racial equity in corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just say, like, from my own standpoint, there were conversations that I had never had before. There were words they used I had never heard them used before. And there was an openness that I hadn't heard before. That doesn't mean there won't be some regression. That doesn't mean everybody's, you know, gotten everywhere we need to be.
Yeah.
But it was different. And I hope, like hell, it stays different.
Yeah.
So good question Kat asked. You're cross-sector, and we got a lot of folks sitting on here sort of hearing this notion of cross-sector fluency.
Right.
When you, over the years, did you sort of find that there were things that were sort of myths about one sector that you think folks should sort of like dispel or not be intimidated by? Did folks get confused across sectors? Does that prevent them or hold them back from being an effective cross-sector fluent leader?
I think part of the challenge, and it certainly was from time to time, you know, it's in many instances, well, let me say this. Some days Philadelphians struggle with nuance, change. You know, most Philadelphians really do love change as long as things can stay the same. And you should just change things for somebody else, but their thing is good. I think the conversation today would be I think today you could be even more intentional about your actions. So literally still a dozen years ago, you know, we're trying to provide for public safety for everyone. We're trying to provide for quality education for everyone. We're trying to do this. We're trying to do that. I think you've got to be much more direct. I mean, I've tried my best over the 5+ years that I've been out of office. I don't talk that much about Philadelphia, specifically, but we know that there have been significant challenges in the public safety sector in a lot of places across the country. What we don't hear is the day-to-day carnage and what I refer to as mass murder in slow motion all across the country. What we hear about are the kind of big events that capture a lot of attention wherever they may be. But the fact of the matter is that 29 to 32 people are murdered in the United States of America every day, if not more, right? So, and a lot of that is in Black and brown communities. And so when we talk about public safety, we have to be willing to say, yes, we want to devote more resources, not to the exclusion of making, white people or other people less safe, but let's acknowledge that there are some real challenges here and we need to put some resources there. When we want to talk about educational gaps, health disparities, employment, unemployment, reentry, you pick a topic, mostly you will find in every good area, Black people at the bottom, and all the bad areas, Black people at the top. Can we just acknowledge that and say that and then address that and call it for what it is? I can be for Black people and not against white people.
Absolutely.
Or for Latino people and not be against Asian people, right? It's not a zero, it is not a zero-sum game. If you're really trying to do something. Making someone's life better does not mean I have to take something away from you.
Yep.
Right?
That's kind of the gist of what my growing up in Fort Dodge. It's just like it wasn't right, it wasn't fair, it wasn't equitable, right?
All right. Paul, I can jump in here.
No,
I've been getting
please, yeah.
some questions in the chat and
Goodness,
just
proof.
appreciate this conversation so much. So please continue to put your questions in the chat. I will try either direct message me or to the group, and I'll try to summarize. But we do have a question here from Dana Weeks, and she wondered about when we talk about the 5 leadership traits, Paul, in your presentation and the conversation as it's gone. The word collaboration hasn't really come up and isn't a central focus, but I wondered perhaps Paul or Mayor Nutter, if you could just speak to where do you see this living? How does this work in decision making? Obviously, collaboration is incredibly important, and if you could just speak to that a bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jen, I'll take a shot at it. I mean, first of all, I've said this for a long time. I mean, if I only met with people that I really like, I would have had a lot of free time. You need to create the biggest, most productive table possible. Invite people who actually want to get something done, not just have a great conversation. And then empower them and provide resources for them to do what they do best. Part of the challenge for some leaders is, that really bad combination of ego and insecurity, right? So the ego won't let them go and do the right thing that needs to be done, and they're insecure that somebody else might do it. And so in many instances, not a whole lot gets done. We would not have had any of the successes that we had during our time. And we made our fair share of mistakes and, all of that. We got like a few things wrong, more than a few. But any successes that we had came as a result of collaboration within the government, with the public, with the private sector, with the philanthropic sector. If you want to see one big outward sign of collaboration, look at what's going on the waterfront. Without the incredible support of the William Penn Foundation and many, many others, and certainly, state government and feds and everybody else. But I mean, William Penn drove a lot of that activity. You would not have, that incredible front yard that we now have on, now called Dilworth Park, not Granite Dilworth Plaza, but for collaboration with the federal government, Tiger Grant, Center City District, and a number of other funders. And so, small, medium, and large, this is a business of collaboration. The mayor, obviously I talk a lot about mayors. I mean, the mayor is the chief cheerleader of the town. You're the chief executive, but you've got to drive an agenda, bring people together, let them do their thing, and knock a couple of heads from time to time. I kept a couple things in my office. One was I got a bottle of Woodford Reserve that mayor of Louisville at the time sent me, but he also sent me a Louisville Slugger with my name on it. Now, the Woodford Reserve I kept in a closet because I was, that was for me. But I kept the Louisville Slugger up on the desk because I wanted folks to understand we can do this the easy way, we can do this the hard way. But I do have a baseball bat right there handy if necessary.
And the only thing I would add to what the mayor just said, Jen, was for me, collaboration is almost sort of like a result of the characteristic of cross-sector fluency, along with this one generosity mindset, which we didn't spend any time on. Those two characteristics absolutely positively are vital to and enable that kind of collaboration. The generosity mindset thing came originally from Roseanne Haggerty, who Michael knows, who runs Community Solutions, who is as effective as anybody is on homelessness in America. And I was asking her, how do you walk into communities with such a contentious, complex issue as homelessness, and how do you land? And her reflexive answer is, I have to go in the generosity mindset. And it's just about what the mayor said, like you have to be open to people. That doesn't mean you have to like everybody. It doesn't mean you have to accept everybody, but your mind's got to be open. You got to be trying to make the whole grain of sum of its parts. You got to try to figure out you got to be the person in the room that's going to try to get the most or the best out of everyone, because so many other people are playing a zero-sum game. So those kinds of people that can think cross-sector and can think with a generosity mindset are going to be the leaders that make a difference.
Great, thank you. Question from Jennifer Rodriguez. Isn't one of the issues that solving these big problems require long-term strategies? And we in the US do not plan on 30 to 50-year horizons. We focus too much on short term. So we could speak to the difference here, I guess, with long-term, short-term thinking and how that comes up with the rebuilders in your book, Paul.
You know, the answer is hell yes to that one. I guess what I would say to that is some of that I'm not sure, I didn't try to answer in the book, but I do think data lets you think longer term. And this characteristic of 24/7 authenticity, these are about people that are truly committed to a cause for the long term. They're relentlessly, persistently committed to honesty, integrity, and especially to personal accountability. So I guess I would say, again, those traits to me enable people to think. Data absolutely enables people to think longer term. Data lets you look at milestones. It lets you see if you're making progress. So I would say a couple of those characteristics are enablers of us thinking longer term. That is such a huge cultural thing, of course, Jennifer, that I'm not going to overcome that with one book. It's a wonderful question.
Yeah. I mean, I fully agree. And part of the challenge is a lot of the thinking, and again, this is not just a Philly thing, you know, it's tied to election cycles. How long am I going to be here? What fingerprints can I put on things? What's my thing? What am I going to be known for? You know, people would ask me toward the tail end of my second term, you know, oh, what's your legacy going to be? I said, well, first of all, legacies are like really for like really old people, you know, and someone else will write about that. What I'm focused on is, this is the amount of time I have. I was happy to get the 4, and I was fortunate to get another 4. You have to be willing in politics. You have to be willing to do things now for which you know you will probably get virtually no credit. But if you actually care about the place that you're serving and the people that you serve, you will do it anyway. That was my focus about public safety. That was our focus about education. That was our focus about economic development and jobs and population and a bunch of issues. And again, I mentioned the waterfront. I mean, I think there's going to be a cap over part of 95. That's not the only thing we did. I knew that wasn't going to happen during my time. There was no way that was going to happen, right? But it was important for the city. And so if you do the job, you don't have to worry about keeping the job, is really kind of the mindset I had. But, you know, but we did produce, like, what was that, Plan 2035 or something, I think a few years ago. I mean, trying to, like, give some focus, give some direction. And then the next person that comes, you know, it's like a relay race. You take a look at it. If it makes some sense, keep doing it. I mean, you know, I talk to mayors across the country. I tell them, you know, there's no rule that says you have to get rid of everything that your predecessor ever did. I mean, it's not written anywhere. And sometimes it makes no sense, but, you know, people do what they do.
Awesome. I love it. And just want to recognize Jennifer's comment there that Mayor, that's the ultimate generosity mindset. I mean, it certainly is. A question from Flora Wolf here. If too many white people really do believe that meeting needs for Black and Brown people means losing out for white people, how do we get them to engage or trust or share? It's a really important, pertinent question for the time we're in right now.
Yeah. I think other white people have to dispel that notion. Black people can't solve that particular issue. We can't, Black people cannot convince white people that we are not the problem or that we want anything. You know, I don't want any of yours. I want my own. I don't want your slice of pizza. Let's either buy a bigger pizza or let's buy an additional pizza. I don't want your slice, right? This is the United States of America. There is more than enough to go around in this country. And so, you know, when we look at big movements, in the civil rights movement, for all the work that Dr. King and everybody was doing, when white America couldn't take watching the dogs, the fire hoses, the beatings, the hangings, and everything else that went on, whether it was their head or their heart that changed, but folks just said, we can't deal with this anymore. And some change happened. Not perfect, and we're still working on it, right? So people have to decide how much you're willing to put up with. I think one of the best examples of someone speaking truth to their constituents, many of you will remember the John McCain town hall meeting, where I think a lady said, like Barack Obama wasn't born in the country. He's a socialist, a terrorist. I mean, whatever she was saying. And John McCain looked that lady dead in her face and said, that's wrong. That's not true. He's an American. He's a patriot. He loves this country. We have a difference of opinion on policy. And she tried, I think, to come back at him one more time. And he just said, no, that's just not right. And literally, politely walked away.
Yep.
That's what people have to be willing to do.
I'm going to add two quick things, Jen. It's hard to follow that up. The first one that he said, which I agree with wholeheartedly. When people ask me this, it's white people got to talk to white people. Like, seriously, I got to be convinced of my friends. We got to be convincing each other. That is really part of the equation. The second thing I'll say, and I hope I can convey this in the right way, the experience of going through last year as a white person from May 25th forward, it revealed to me, number one, how much I did not know that I thought I knew, right? So I had to acknowledge my own ignorance. The number two, and this was through several African-American friends, I also think I understood better how to be a better white ally or to convene more of my white friends. So I would also say to white folks, like, don't be afraid to lead on this shit, right? Like, get out there with your friends, get out there in your community. And yeah, you'll probably stick your foot in your mouth. So have a friend like Mayor Nutter that says this guy's for real. But white people got to get out there and do it themselves. And I will say, I think I have learned one of the many painful lessons of last year was just how to be an effective white ally or how to be a better white ally, which is a constant journey. That white people got to talk to white people.
Thank you, Paul. I think as we're at 54 here, so I'll throw you one more question. It's from Eric Stunens. Did you see different traits among rebuilders that were bottom-up grassroots leaders versus those that you profiled who held more formalized and positional leadership?
That's a fascinating question. I have never thought of it from that direction. I guess I would say this. I do think that the notion of 24/7 authenticity, which again is I define as a relentless, persistent commitment to honesty, integrity, and especially to personal accountability, which is increasingly rare today. And it's one of those traits that if enough people don't believe that, we're just going to lose like all sort of faith in the truth. I do think that's a very individual sort of bottoms up thing. Every person can decide to do that, right? Data conviction cross sector, that probably takes some folks I'm hanging out with. But that notion of 24/7 authenticity, it's kind of like I said about data. People not only have to believe in data, we have to relentlessly believe in it. This time where it's so hard to have anything, facts that we can agree on. The same thing goes for authenticity. It is so damn hard these days to believe in honesty and that people have integrity. So if you're going to have it, man, you got to be so committed to it. But we have to have enough people that will stay with it and be committed to that principle and that value that eventually we can break through this fog that we're in right now. Great question.
Great. Do we have time for one more,
one
Paul,
more?
or should we probably wrap up?
Nah, do one more quick.
One more. Okay, great. So
You never know what I might say on the last question.
I know, that's what I give it to the mayor.
Okay. Well, so great question from David Griffith here and a +1 from Kat. Is your perspective, how do we incent, or in your perspective, sorry, how do we incent political leadership to put all grandchildren over greed?
We need to get the grandmoms out. No, I mean, seriously, I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is that most political people, you know, really are trying to address, to some extent, the needs and concerns of their constituents. I think in many instances, we just let people off the hook. You know, we do our civic duty, hopefully, come out twice a year and then say, you know, okay, go to City Hall, go to the State House, go to Congress, go wherever you're going to go, county seat, and, you know, do your job. And, you know, your participation is not over just because you voted. And I'm glad you voted, right? But then you have to hold us accountable. You know, I mean, people hold the person that paints their house more accountable than their elected officials sometimes. If you hired somebody to paint your house blue and you came home one day and it was green, what would you say? It's like, A, what the hell are you doing? B, I'm not paying you, and I'll never hire you again. But, you know, we kind of keep putting the same people back and then wonder why we're getting the same old stuff. So, you know, if we want people to be concerned about the grandchildren, you know, a whole bunch of parents, grandparents, and people who just care about kids need to raise their voices and get actively engaged and involved. I mean, this politics, not just in Philly, politics is a full participation sport. It is not a spectator kind of thing. This is not Netflix. This is not Amazon. This is not Hulu. Right? It is day to day, pay attention, see what's going on, raise your voice.
I got one more thought that'll take 1 minute and then I'll hand it back to Jen. When I was writing this book, I was almost done with this thing in February 2020. I was down to like my last little edits, right? And it was just like last little tweaks. And then 2020 happened. There's a quote that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. And that's exactly what happened in 2020. We all know it, we all lived it. So the last edits I made on that book were on November 1st, 2020. And I will just say the reason I did that was because my job, excuse me, was to tune my message to the moment, just like I want leaders to do. And that became the book, not that I just sort of, excuse me, thought I should write. It became the book that I thought I had to write. So I just want to thank everyone. Excuse me for choking. I just want to thank everyone that sort of made this possible tonight. It was a great team effort. And I hope folks listening, I hope you leave motivated to think about and define the leader you want to be to meet the complexities and reverse the inequities of the decade ahead. Jen, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Paul, so much. Thank you, Mayor Nutter, for being here, for sharing all of your expertise, your wisdom. Paul, for sparking this session, and also I'm the managing director here of our local social venture partners chapter, which just recently launched, as some of you on the call who are partners know. But Paul was the founding president of SVP, and so we're just excited to have him here in our city to be sharing all that he's learned along his journey. So a quick commercial for SVP. If you see yourself as a cross-sector fluency as one of your leadership traits, or if you want to develop one of your leadership traits, SVP is the place for you. We are a collective giving network that is a group of engaged leaders. We're 50 or so strong now and growing. We encourage you to get involved. So in the follow-up message from Chip tomorrow, our co-host for this session, who I also want to thank, you'll learn about how you might be able to get involved, and just want to thank everyone on this call for being here, and go do something. Really, this is a call to action, and we hope that we'll hear from you and that we can continue the conversation.
Get your vaccine. Got my second shot today. Get your vaccine.
Attaboy.
Get your vaccine.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
All right. Thank you so
hat.
much.
I appreciate you wearing that Eagles hat on the show here today. I appreciate that.
Good night, sir.
See you later. Bye.